Good, good. So I think we're live now. So really, really warm welcome to everyone. I'm Subhadra Mati, and I'm here in the London Buddhist Centre on Dharma Day. And you can't see him yet, but I'm here with, as it were, Padmavajra. So I think we're live now. So really, really warm welcome to everyone. Oops. Okay, slightly made a little mistake there, but luckily Sanjay's helping me. So sorry about the feedback loop. So you saying was, I'm Subhadra Mati, and with me is Padmavajra, as it were. He's at Padmaloka, our retreat centre in Norfolk. And today we're very, very lucky because he is going to be giving us our keynote Dharma Day talk. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce him. But yeah, first of all, again, if you've just joined us, to say welcome to all of you. Do say hello in the chat box, say where you're from. Always lovely to hear where people are from. And especially if you're here for the very first time today on Dharma Day, it would be lovely to hear from you. So today we're celebrating Dharma Day, which is one of our main Buddhist festivals in the whole year. And Dharma Day celebrates the very first time that the teachings of the Buddha were actually communicated and understood. It's a celebration of what we call the wheel of the Dharma being set rolling. That's a poetic way of sort of evoking this sort of majestic, joyful moment where the Buddha was able to communicate what he discovered and somebody actually understood. And that wheel of the Dharma has been rolling ever since, right down to today. On Dharma Day, where it's been celebrated all over the Buddhist world, I'm sure, the full moon day. So we here at the London Buddhist Centre have been celebrating all week, actually, with talks and meditations. And today as well, we started with meditation. We had a Dharma study this morning. We had a whole children's event. We had a sort of ritualized reading just in the event before this. And we're going to finish this evening with mitra ceremonies, a special ritual and mitra ceremonies. And I'll say more about that later. But for now, we're going to have our talk by Padmavajra. And the format's very, very simple. So in a moment, I'll introduce Padmavajra and invite him to speak to us. And then there'll be chance for you to ask questions of Padmavajra. So as he's speaking, do think of questions that you might have or things that you want to follow up more. And then later on, this afternoon, I'll be able to feed them to Padmavajra and he'll respond to them. So the whole afternoon will finish at 5:30. So Padmavajra is truly my delight to be introducing Padmavajra to you. And when I think of Padmavajra, what I think of is someone who is a friend. And he's a friend in so many ways. I think of Padmavajra as a friend to me personally. And what I was thinking about was before I really knew Padmavajra very well, I had occasion to phone up Padmaloka, the retreat centre where he lives. And I just to phone up there. I still do, actually. And Padmavajra was always the first to get to the telephone. And every time he answered the phone, he'd just say in this sort of, with his beaming smile, as I imagined, he would just say, "Oh, hello, Subhadra Mati, how wonderful to hear from you," as if I was a sort of long-lost friend, even though I wasn't even calling for him. But he would just greet me with such a sort of fulsome well-wishing. It just made me want to get to know him more, which we have over the years. So he's, I think of Padmavajra as a friend to me personally. He's a friend to the London Buddhist Centre. He comes here regularly when we're, in the time when we can physically travel around, which will hopefully come again before too long. Padmavajra has been a regular visitor here, meeting up with people, giving his friendship, and also giving Dharma talks whenever he's asked to, which is often. So he's a real friend to all of us at the London Buddhist Centre. And then, of course, he's a friend to individual people, especially for men who are training for ordination, and he is a friend to them. And Padmaloka Retreat Centre, that is a retreat centre for training men in this amazing journey towards ordination, towards making the ordination vows. So Padmavajra is first and foremost a friend, and he lives at Padmaloka. And I've been very, very impressed with the ethos at Padmaloka. Well, always I am, but particularly during this lockdown period, Padmaloka have really used this time to be on retreat together. There's a large community there. They've really deepened their meditation, deepened their spiritual friendship with each other, deepened their Dharma understanding. And having done that, then they've reached out, giving seminars, giving talks. In fact, this is the second talk Padmavajra is giving today on Dharma Day. He's already given one talk, and now he's giving a second talk, all in the same day. So yeah, very, very pleased to welcome and rejoice in Padmavajra and in Padmaloka, where he lives. And Padmavajra is going to be talking to us today on 3 big ideas that started Buddhism. So if you were all here with me, I'd say let's give a massive round of applause for Padmavajra. So we'll imaginatively all give a massive round of applause to welcome Padmavajra. So over to Padmavajra.
Oh, you need to hide me. Can we have gallery view?
Okay, so whenever you're ready, Padmavajra. Yeah.
Thank you, yeah. We're just sorting out some technical things here.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Subhadramati. I better check that you can hear me.
I can hear you loud and clear. And everyone
very good. It's very
well. Yeah.
Good. It's very, very good to be with the London Buddhist Centre, and I gather probably many people from all over the world to celebrate Dharma Chakra Pravartana Day, the setting in motion of the wheel of the Dharma. And what we're concerned with today is the Buddha's communication. As Subhadramati said, we're celebrating the first time that the Buddha's Dharma, his teaching, the truth that he discovered under the Bodhi tree, the first time, not only that he communicated that, but the first time that was understood and realized to some extent in another person. That was Anyata Kundanya and 4 other old friends of the Buddha in the deer park at Sanath. Now, I'm not going to actually go into the Dharma Chakra Pravartana story itself. I actually did that this morning, giving a talk called Listen, the Deathless Has Been Attained. What I want to talk about is the fact, first of all, that the Buddha spent his entire life after his enlightenment, which probably occurred, well, the traditions differ. Some people say he was quite a young man when he gained enlightenment. Some people say he was in his 30s. Young meaning early 20s. Anyway, we don't really know. But until he was an old man of 80, the Buddha spent his time communicating the Dharma. And that meant walking from place to place. And he would communicate the Dharma to anybody. It didn't matter what their circumstances were, what kind of person they were. It was completely indiscriminate teaching. Whoever wanted to listen, he communicated. When he wasn't doing that, he was spending his time in retreat, in the rainy season especially, with his disciples, teaching them, but doing a lot of meditation. And of course, in the Buddha's case, meditation would be spontaneous. No need to kind of make any effort to meditate. I want to actually pick up on his incredible last tour. Incredible last tour when he was an old man of 80, very sick, in quite a bit of pain, but going on a last Dharma tour, actually taking the Dharma into places where it hadn't really been taught before, in northern India, or where there were just a few of his disciples. He wanted to do that. And in that tour, in most of the places he went to, it's said that he gave a comprehensive Dharma discourse, a comprehensive Dharma teaching. And I'm going to just tell you the underlying structure in the words of the suttas, in the words of the traditional text. So this is what he taught. This is morality. This is meditation. This is wisdom. Great is the fruit. Great is the advantage of meditation when it is set round with morality. Great is the fruit. Great is the advantage of wisdom when it is set round with meditation. Utterly liberated from the poisonous floods of craving, becoming, and ignorance is the mind that is fully set round by wisdom. So it's significant that on that last tour, what he particularly wanted his disciples to know about was this, what we sometimes called threefold path of morality, meditation, wisdom, and then in a sense, a fourth stage, liberation from the poisonous floods that keep you bound to reactive consciousness. So these are the three big ideas that I've been asked to talk about. Of course, they're not called three big ideas in the tradition. They're actually called the Tri Shiksha, or the Tiksikha in Pali, the three trainings. So the three big ideas are actually three things to train in. Sometimes they're called the Tikanda or the Triskanda, the three heaps, or the Arya Skandhas, the three noble heaps. That means there's a lot of training that's going to be going on in these areas. So the three big ideas are really three things that you actually do, that you practice, that you train in. You train in them for a specific purpose. You train in them for the purpose of liberation from those inner poison drives towards sense craving, becoming, I'll say more about these later, and ignorance. So it's very important this. These trainings, these shiksha, you only really start training in them when you dedicate yourself, when you commit yourself to enlightenment, to liberation. It means, when you take up these trainings, that you want to change yourself at the deepest possible level. And it's interesting that this particular teaching is given on that last tour only to those who are fully committed to the path of enlightenment, only to those who regard the Buddha as their teacher, and they're following his Dhamma, and they're relying on his Sangha. In other words, only to those who are going for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, who are fully committed. Of course, if you're not yet committed to the Buddhist path, it doesn't mean that you can't benefit from these trainings. Of course you can. But it's important to remember why the Buddha taught these trainings. He taught them for the complete liberation from all conditioning. So they're known, these trainings are known as the training in Adhi Shila, Adhi Samadhi, and Adhi Prajna. Adhi means the higher. So it's the training in the higher ethics, the higher meditation, and the higher wisdom, because we're not dealing with any ordinary ethics. We're not dealing with any ordinary meditation. We're not dealing with any ordinary wisdom. It's all for the sake of liberation. It's all for the sake of gaining Buddhahood. So I think it's important to bear that in mind as we go through. These trainings are for a higher purpose, for a higher life, if you really want to benefit from them. The word shiksha, which is translated as training, comes from a root meaning to be able, to be capable. Traditionally, you would enter the training under a teacher. In the Buddhist tradition, you would enter these 3 trainings under a teacher, entering into a particular community. And the teacher, or his disciples, or her disciples, would really see whether or not you were up to the training, whether you were psychologically and spiritually ready to undergo that training. So we have something of this in our own ordination training. Men and women training for ordination, wanting to enter into our order. That whole process is, in a way, the equivalent of that sort of testing. Well, are you really up for this? Do you really want to engage in this training? And it's a demanding training, actually, if you're serious, because you really have to look at yourself when you enter this training. You have to take full responsibility for yourself. You also notice from that quotation I gave from the sutta that it's a progressive, a gradual training. It builds. We have this phrase, set round with, that meditation set round with ethics. Great is the fruit, great is the advantage of meditation when it's set round with morality, set round with ethics. And similarly, great is the fruit and advantage of wisdom when it's set round with meditation. The word I'm translating here as set round with is paribhavita, which can also mean filled with. So when our meditation is filled with our moral behavior, our skillful behavior in life, then you experience the fruits of meditation. When our wisdom is filled with meditation experience, concentration, samadhi, then there is going to be the fruits and advantages of wisdom. So it's very important to bear that in mind. It's a gradual, a developmental path. It builds as we go along. You can see this very obviously sometimes when people meditate and they have difficulty in concentrating the mind or developing positive emotion. Sometimes people think, well, I just need a little bit more of technique to make it better. And of course, little of what you can do with your mind is very useful. They're very useful indeed. And a good meditation teacher will provide you with that. But very often, the reason why we struggle in meditation is because our behavior, our day-to-day behavior is not sufficiently in tune with what we're trying to do when we meditate. You know, if we're spending our day going from distraction to distraction, if we're very anxious and busy, it's going to be very, very hard to settle in meditation. If we're spending our day involved in harsh speech or something like that, not treating other people very well or being very indifferent to people, it's going to be very difficult to develop metabhavna, loving kindness, meditation. The more mindful one is in life, the more generous one is in life, then there's a chance that when we meditate, we can go deeper, we can make progress. This is, of course, why going on retreat is so very, very important. When you go on retreat, you leave behind what you'll usually do. You're in very, very supportive conditions, and that means that the meditation can go deeper. So let's turn to the first of these, the first of the 3 big ideas, the 3 trainings. Let's turn to Shila in Sanskrit, Sila in Pali, which can be translated as morality, ethics, and virtue. So we're talking now about the training in morality, the training in ethics. So first of all, it's said that Buddhist ethics is an ethics of intention. It's an ethics of individual responsibility. This is embodied, of course, in the first two verses of the Dhammapada. Experiences are led by mind, made up of mind. Mind is the chief. If one speaks or acts with an impure mind, suffering follows, like the wheel following the hoof of the ox. Experiences are led by mind, made up of mind. Mind is the chief. If one speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness follows, like one's never departing shadow. So it's an ethics of intention. It's what our motivation is. Are we acting out of a motivation that, as we say, is skillful? Are we acting out of a motivation which is unskillful? So we need to be making sure that our mind is very, very pure. Our mind is very pure. It's interesting, this word pure. I know some people have hang-ups about words like purity and impurity. The word for pure is more like that which is the best in you. It's related to the word for faith. Faith in your potential, faith in your movement in the direction of Buddhahood. So it's more like that. Are you living up to the highest in you? And the word for impure, interestingly enough, means more like spoilt. And we can sometimes feel this, can't we? When we're acting, we do something that, oh, I really let myself down there. I really went against the best in me. That's more the sort of feeling of this ethics of intention. But you notice in these verses, if one speaks or acts, if one speaks or acts. So it's not just an ethics of intention, because sometimes people can say, well, I meant well, but you used harsh speech. You slapped somebody. I'm sure none of you have done that. But I meant well. I didn't mean to, but you've caused harm here. So speaking and acting are important too. You do things from your intention. You speak harshly or untruthfully, for example, or you have a violent stance on life, or you speak truthfully and you perform deeds of loving kindness. So it's very, very important, this. It's not just intention. We do have to look at what we're doing with our mind, but we also have to pay attention to what we're actually doing and how we're actually affecting people, other people. And of course, the more our actions are the expressions of, for example, loving kindness, truthfulness, clarity, mindfulness, the more our intention to be skillful is strengthened. There's a sort of feedback between action, outer action, and the mind itself. And you can begin to see, in talking like this, the connection, therefore, between morality and meditation. The training in Buddhist ethics requires continual mindfulness. Mindfulness in the sense of vigilance. Mindfulness in the sense of what we call apramada, wakefulness. Mindfulness of our purpose in life, of our goal in life. Mindfulness especially of other people, not just of ourselves and our own way of conducting ourselves in the world, but we also need to be profoundly aware of the effect of our actions on other people. So constant vigilance and mindfulness is needed to really train in Buddhist ethics. Of course, we do also have the 5 great ethical precepts, the 5 sikhapatas, the 5 training principles that we can refer to. I won't go into those. We can refer to those. They give us a sort of pattern of behavior that we can check ourselves with. So we're not just going along in the dark, so to speak. The Buddha has given us these 5 great training principles. Indeed, the 5 great training principles are modeled on his own life. It says that a Buddha naturally follows these 5 precepts, doesn't have to think about the observance of these 5 precepts. So in training in the 5 precepts, we really are following the Buddha. The first and most basic precept is abstention from harming living beings and the principle of loving kindness. This is the basic Buddhist precept. It means eschewing all forms of violence and harm to other people. It will result, if we take it seriously, in making profound changes to our life, becoming vegetarian, becoming vegan. That's just an example. There are in so many ways, there are infinite number of ways you can practice this precept. And it means turning to loving kindness. It means really making sure, to use the words from an early course of the Buddha, it means removing the dart of hatred in the heart. I've been reflecting a lot recently on what's called the Atadanda Sutta, the sutta of embracing violence, of taking up the stick. And it describes, the Buddha is describing why he went forth. It's an alternative version of why he took up a different life. And it was observing the conflict in the world. Observing the conflict in the world. He said, see how people arm themselves. See how they take up the danda, the stick. See how they embrace violence. And because they take up the stick, and that stick might be an actual stick, or it might be views, prejudices, dogmas, that makes them fearful. And out of that fear comes violence. It's a very interesting analysis of human conflict. He said, people, look at the way they quarrel, look at the conflict. And seeing this, he felt samvega, a tremendous sense of spiritual urgency, a sort of shock that he needed to live a different life. And then he saw that what drove people was this thorn in their heart, this thorn of attachment, thorn of ill will, thorn of pain, really, of bad, which made them turn against each other. So practicing this first basic Buddhist precept is transforming all that, coming to a completely different stance on life, the stance of love, loving kindness, maitri, friendliness. Much could be said about this, but I want to quote the great Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, Bodhisattva Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, one of the most important Buddhists of the 20th century, who brought the Dhamma back to India, who inspired the Dhamma revolution, who inspired Bhante Sangharakshita, who knew Bhante Sangharakshita. In his writings on the Buddha Dhamma, he has this wonderful insight. He says, morality is Dhamma. Dhamma is morality. In Marathi, niti manje Dhamma, Dhamma manje niti. And he says, this morality takes the place of God in Buddhism. Because this morality, he says, is sacred. It's the most holy thing in life. It's what protects society. And he defines this morality, which is also truth, which is also, as it were, righteousness, Dhamma, as the direct necessity for a human being to love another human being. He said that is the most sacred and holy thing in life, the direct necessity for a human being to love another human being. He says this morality is not only sacred and holy, it's universal. It's for all people, all places, all times. It's a completely indiscriminate loving kindness in bodily and verbal and mental action. And he says, without this, there is no individual human progress. And in the end, there is no society. Without this morality, which is Dhamma, this sacred and universal stance of loving kindness, which is sacred, treating other people with respect and love and even reverence, there is no society, because it's this love, this morality in behavior that leads to fraternity, that leads to a cohesive society. So I think this is incredible. I think this is very, very profound, what Dr. Ambedkar is saying here, and the need to practice this. If we practice this, all the other precepts will happen. You don't need to think about any other Buddhist ethics if you have this, treating people in this way. And of course, this also brings up the whole area of Sangha, of spiritual friendship and spiritual community, which is so crucial to our training. If we're practicing this morality, we'll naturally gravitate to other people practicing this kind of morality. We'll want to be with them. We'll want to take it out further, but we'll want especially to be with people like ourselves who are also training in that way, and that will support and strengthen that sacred and universal morality. So we can boil down the training in ethics as continual mindfulness of loving kindness, continual mindfulness of this sacred and universal ethic. Living like this, samadhi will emerge. So let's move to training in samadhi. Samadhi can be translated as meditation or concentration, but don't misunderstand. It's the training to bring about the full unification of our consciousness, of our mind, our heart. It's the gathering and unity through classical Buddhist meditation practices like the mindfulness of breathing and the metta bhavana and others too. It's the training classical practices to gather our disparate, broken, fragmented consciousness. It's to bring about the unification of our entire being. So let's see how this might happen. What's the classical sort of steps in Buddhist meditational practice? The first thing that we have to do is practice what's called viveka, which means withdrawal or even solitude. It means withdrawing for our engagement in the distractions of life. And you know this, when you sit down to meditate at home or in your community or in your retreat center, you close your eyes. You turn inwards to the meditation subject. That's what you have to do. You can't meditate if you're looking out and about all the time. This is why a distracted life means it's very, very hard to achieve samadhi. So you need to practice what's called kaya viveka, the withdrawal of the body from a distracted life. Very, very difficult these days. People love distractions. These things called computers, I've got one in front of me, and this is why I'm communicating with you, how I can communicate with you, are just temples of distraction. So it means it's more and more harder and harder to achieve kaya viveka, but we have to do it if we want to make progress in samadhi. But then you go deeper, you've got to practice then chitta viveka, the withdrawal of consciousness from being involved in negative affectivity, unskillful states of mind, craving, hatred, restlessness, ill will, aversion, all those things. You need to withdraw from that and move more deeply into positive, skilled states of consciousness. What you're doing in samadhi, in meditation, the training in samadhi, is you're directly working on the mind and the heart. You're trying to engage with, you're working to engage with the deep habitual currents of the mind. It's very important to understand that the notion of mind, of chitta, in Buddhism is far deeper than we know in the West. I mean, the word mind isn't really a very good word, I think, because we associate mind so much with intellect. Well, it's not that you're working with in meditation. You are to some extent, but it's more working with the deep currents of consciousness. The Yogacara, they talk about practicing in what's called the alaya, the deep store consciousness, where all the habit energies are. You're working to purify that and change that so that that current is flowing into the path of enlightenment. The most important thing, first of all, as well as that withdrawal, is to establish regularity of practice. Daily meditation practice, twice daily meditation practice, in mindfulness of breathing, Padmavajra, those two great practices, and to go on retreats, weekend retreats, longer retreats from time to time. Very, very important with meditation. Don't strain. Don't force yourself. I remember Sangharakshita once saying, my beloved teacher once saying, it's very important to associate meditation with pleasure. So when you start off meditating, meditate just for 20 minutes and slowly build up. You're not, you might think you're a tough guy or gal, sorry to use that sort of expressions, if you're really toughing it out hour after hour. But if you're getting a headache and just getting tense, well, that's no good. You're going to have a big reaction, and you're not going to want to meditate. So associate meditation with relaxation, pleasure, enjoyment, because you're going to need that. Because as you go on in meditation, you are going to be confronting difficult material, and you need to build it up slowly over time. And what you're doing in the training in Samadhi is gathering and expanding. That's the way I like to think about it. You can see this particularly in the mindfulness of breathing, the way you gather yourself together around the anchor of the breath, around that lovely rhythm and movement in the body that gets subtler and subtler. You gather your consciousness. It's deeply satisfying, feeling that the sort of what's usually spread out, all the little rivulets of consciousness are actually coming together into a deep river, a deep, broad river. Samadhi is defined as ekagrata, one-pointedness of mind, but not one-pointedness of one part of your mind concentrating on something, but much more in terms of the unification of consciousness, the unification of even energies, if you like, flowing in one direction, flowing in the direction of what is most meaningful. So there's a gathering, everything together, but there's also expansion. That's very, very important as well. There's not just gathering, there's expansion. You can really notice that particularly in Padmavajra, loving kindness meditation. Of course, that's another kind of unification practice, because what you're purifying the mind of when you do the Padmavajra is division, the division created by your aversion and indifference. Love is the great unifier, but it's a unification through expansion, where you're dissolving the distinction between yourself and others. So in this way, you begin to go deeper into samadhi. You start moving into what are known as the dhyanas or the jhanas, these absorptions, these higher states of consciousness. No time to go into all those now, or the Brahma Viharas, the sublime abodes of loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. Increasingly positive, very robustly positive mental states, highly expansive. They're known as illimitables, infinitudes, but highly refined states of consciousness. And of course, as you go on more deeply in your samadhi, this will affect your behavior, your shila, your practice of morality. Your shila affects your meditation affects your shila. And as you go more deeply along the path, you'll start to feel the need for profound changes in your lifestyle. You'll want a greater simplicity in your life. You might feel a longing to change your livelihood, if that's at all possible. You'll want to live more meaningfully. You'll want to live closer to spiritual friends. So samadhi can lead to all sorts of changes. It sounds very smooth and straightforward. Of course, it's not, because as you go on in this way, it can bring up tremendous conflicts, because you can feel that you're changing profoundly, but you're in an environment where it's hard to make a change. So you might have to live with that. You're going to have to be quite heroic sometimes to bring about the changes that you want to. Samadhi as well can lead to all kinds of exalted experiences for some people. But however exalted the experiences, whatever the changes that are made through samadhi, it's not a permanent transformation. This is very, very important. As we go along in the stages of the trainings of Shila and Samadhi, morality, we can feel ourselves making real progress. And then we feel we're going backwards. We seem to gain something, we seem to gain a sort of foothold on the path, and then we're thrown off. We seem to go backwards, up and down. It's hard to gain ground, as the great Shantideva says. I've seen it many times over the years, and I've felt it many times, where somebody's come to me and they've had some incredible visionary experience, meditative experience. They say, I know now, I know. I can't go backwards. And sure enough, they do go backwards. Because they're still just in the stages of Shila and Samadhi. So we need the third great training as well. We need the training in prajna, the training in the higher wisdom, knowing directly, seeing things as they really are directly, unmediated by any concepts or ideas. Now, prajna is a training. It's the training in wisdom that goes alongside the training in ethics and the training in meditation. This is very important, I think. Sometimes people say, well, prajna, oh, it's very, very high, very exalted. But in the Buddha teaches the training in the three wisdoms. So let's just briefly look at the three wisdoms. First of all, there's the wisdom that comes through learning. So that's the first training in wisdom. This really means familiarizing yourself and knowing very well what the Buddha actually teaches. If you're serious about wisdom, you need to listen to the Buddha. You need to listen to the basic Buddhist ideas. You need to really take them in to your mind. It's very, very hard, I think, to develop wisdom without learning wisdom from a wise person. And Buddhists learn wisdom from the Buddha himself. Second level of wisdom is the Chintamaya Prajna, the wisdom of intensively or intently reflecting upon what you've learned. So you really investigate it. You really see how you can live by that, knowing that teaching of the Buddha in all the areas of life. You see the changes you need to make in relation to that teaching. You ask yourself the real meaning of that teaching. And then finally, there's the wisdom of making a living experience. Bhavanamaya Prajna, the wisdom that turns into actual life, behavior. So we're doing this in a context of total training. These three levels or three kinds of wisdom, with total training of ethical behavior, of meditation, with spiritual friends. So let's take a very simple notion. Let's take the notion of impermanence. First of all, we hear the teaching of the Buddha, all conditioned things are impermanent. It's very clear what's being said. The Buddha teaches universal impermanence. There is nothing permanent in the whole of existence. If you have an argument with that, you're not learning, you failed in the first level of wisdom. The Buddha teaches the absolute, all-pervasive nature of impermanence. There's no essence anywhere. But then you start reflecting on that. You see it in everything and everybody around you. You see it especially in loved ones, yourself. You see the reality of death. And you do this, of course, in the very positive context generated by your practice of ethics and meditation, this greatly expanded, this greatly purified and concentrated consciousness. It's very important, this. It's very important, especially when you meditate on something like impermanence and death. You're doing it within this highly positive, highly concentrated consciousness. If you don't do it in that context, you can end up becoming depressed and nihilistic, and you really won't see things as they really are. Your preparation through ethics and meditation means that you can go right into the truth and meaning of impermanence, the profound mystery of impermanence. One of the things that starts to open up, when you really see impermanence directly, is the realization that liberation is possible. Because you see you see through any notion of a fixed self view. You have no doubts that change is possible. You have no doubts that these practices that you're using can lead to liberation. There are all kinds of other fruits. My favorite, one of my most favorite sayings of the Buddha from the Dhammapada: others, that is those who are not training in the Dhamma, others do not realize that we're all heading for death. Those who do realize that we're heading for death will compose their quarrels, will end their quarrels. It's a wonderful insight. When you know impermanence, when you know the reality of your death, the reality of everybody's death, you'll stop quarreling, you'll stop conflict, love and friendship and friendliness. So this is really important to understand, that the realization of impermanence, if you're really seeing it, it leads to deeper connectedness with all of life. So that's just obviously we don't have the time for a more detailed and more thorough exploration, but we've seen how ethics gives rise to samadhi, to meditation, how meditation can give rise to wisdom, and then there is liberation. When the heart is filled with wisdom, then you're liberated from these deep poisonous fluxes, the asavas, as they're called. They're sort of discharges that drive us in a particular way. What goes is craving for things, for people, and instead there's a profound contentment and appreciation and love for all of life. There is liberation from bhava, becoming meaning the sort of a sense of being a fixed and habitual being, a kind of tendency to a very fixed kind of embodiment, a restricted embodiment, if you like. And instead, what you're liberated into is a boundless creative response to others, a boundless creative response. And finally, you're liberated from the poisonous drive towards ignorance. There's no darkness of unknowing, no confusion. There's just a bright, sparkling, radiant awareness. So you're not just liberated from these poisonous drives, you're liberated into the activity of Buddhahood. And I want to end my talk by just talking about the Buddha as the embodiment of the higher Shila, the higher Samadhi, the higher Prajna on that last tour, found in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. He was very sick, he was very old, the Buddha, he was 80. He said he was like an old cart, a broken down old cart that could only move along if it was sort of lashed together with rope. So he's either literally, he's got bandages holding him together, or he's just holding his, physical body together to communicate. But his behavior is immaculate. He says he never loses mindfulness and clear comprehension, even though he's in pain, when he's moving around, when he's communicating. There is never any loss of that clear, bright mindfulness, particularly of other people and their needs. Constantly throughout that tour, he's aware of all of the people coming to him and particular people in particular difficulty. It's extraordinary. So it's a transcendent morality. It's got nothing to do with the falling apart of the physical body. He naturally does his duty, as it were. In a way, there's no conception of duty. He's the embodiment of duty. Just touring and teaching, everything given the proper care and attention and grace. And then there's his samadhi and his prajna, one of the most poignant passages for me in the whole of the Buddha's life story is when he's extremely sick in retreat, in rainy season retreat. He's in terrible pain, back pain, stomach pain, a pain driving him to death. He's absolutely overwhelmed with it, but he decides, for the sake of the Sangha, to push back death, to take hold of life. And afterwards, after he's, really mastered himself, Ananda, who's his close friend and companion, he's very distressed. He's never seen the Buddha like this before. And the Buddha explains, no, I've decided to hold to life for the sake of the Sangha. He says, the only time I know no pain is when I enter the signless samadhi, the samadhi, the liberation called the signless. This is the profound wisdom absorption where there are no nimittas, no marks, no signs. It's said to arise through the contemplation of impermanence. Presumably, and I'm guessing here, what goes on here, the Buddha, through meditating on impermanence in that profound state of samadhi, means that pain as a mark just vanishes away. It just vanishes away. There is just the flow of experience. So he can be completely apart from that pain. And presumably that's quite handy if he's going to be doing all that touring where he is going to be in a lot of pain. And then there is the Buddha's liberation. And this you see particularly in his attainment of parinibbana, the final nibbana, where he's lying on the stone couch between the twin sala trees that are blooming out of season, shedding their flowers upon him with all his disciples all around. And he enters into the different dhyanas. He goes up and down, all these wonderful meditative states. And then he goes beyond. He vanishes into, a state that's not a state, that neither is not, both, or neither. He demonstrates the mystery of Buddhahood, the mystery of liberation. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Padmavajra. I've just been sitting here enthralled by your talk, and really, this talk of Padmavajra just given us the whole of Buddhism. He's just given us the whole of Buddhism. I was thinking, like, if someone was brand new to Buddhism and thought, well, what is it? Then I would say, listen to this talk. If someone had been practicing for 40 years and said, well, what really is the essence of the Dharma? I say, listen to this talk. So thank you so much for the whole content of your talk, but also I just want to rejoice in the way you've given us this talk. And I was thinking, I don't know how you've managed it, but you've got a combination of being like quite fierce, really, and friendly at the same time. So there's almost this kind of fierce quality, but it's completely friendly and engaging, and makes you, makes me want to practice the Dharma more deeply. And I'm sure that's had that effect on all the people listening. So the good news is this isn't the end. So we're not saying goodbye to Padmavajra now. I think what we'll do is we'll have a little break for 4 minutes, okay? So that will take us up until 5 o'clock. And then we've got a chance to ask Padmavajra questions. We've had a few questions in already, but in that time, think of any questions for Padmavajra, and then I can give them to Padmavajra and he'll respond, I'm sure. So let's just take a few minutes, little comfort break, and then let's come back here at 5 o'clock, and then we'll still have more time with Padmavajra. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think most of us are back. Some people are still off clapping for the NHS, but I'm sure they'll join us back. And so we have a couple of questions already. And do write your questions. We've got lots of appreciation as well, Padmavajra. But some questions. So one question is that sort of round about the middle of your talk, you were saying, well, actually, the Buddhist path, you were encouraged us to find joy, and you said we'll need that because the Buddhist path can be difficult. We'll need courage as well. And somebody was wondering, well, does that mean that the Buddhist path isn't for everyone? And if you need all this courage and resilience and so on, does that mean it's not for everyone?
I've come up. Just a sec.
Okay.
I'm talking to myself. I don't want to do that. Well, first of all, in a sense, the Buddhist path isn't, well, two answers. The Dhamma is for everyone. I mean, the Buddha is very, very clear about that, that his vision is that every single human being has the potential to become enlightened. And no, you know, this. So one way of looking at what the Dhamma is that what Buddhism really is. It's speaking to the deepest part of each and every human being. I think this is very, very important that we shouldn't think of, this is why I don't think it's helpful to think of Buddhism as a sort of religion or something sectarian, because it's speaking to something deep in human beings. The vision is that human beings, what they deeply want to do is to grow and develop. It's this whole idea that life is essentially to do with growth. And we need to express that as human beings in terms of consciously committing ourselves to some sort of path of growth and development and self-transcendence. So it is for everybody. On the other hand, you could say it isn't for everybody because you can only take it up if you feel free not to take it up. Sangharakshita once said, a famous saying, something like, you have to feel free not to be a Buddhist to feel free to be a Buddhist. And I think that's really important. I think if you feel compelled in the wrong sort of way to take up actually any kind of path of development, if there's some sort of sense of you're sort of doing it under compulsion, then there's something wrong. That's going to be oppression. So you need to find the path that in a sense works for you. But even if you really decide freely, I want to live this Buddhist life, you know, and I'm really behind it. What's challenging is that, you know, you are concerned with some very, very deep habitual material that needs to be changed. You know, and of course, the Buddhist conception of this habitual material, it's not just this life, it's lifetimes, you know, that we've been perpetually, you know, going around the reactive cycle and, you know, confronting that self-honesty of the deepest kind, well, can be really quite difficult. So you do really need to build up very, very strong reserves of inspiration, a very strong sense of faith and courage, no matter how much you want to do it. So a few answers there. I hope that's helpful.
Good, thank you. Thank you. And actually, another heartfelt question from Rohini was saying, because you were talking earlier about practicing and you naturally want to surround yourself with people who are also practicing. But what about if you don't have those people around? How can you practice without a Sangha around you? What advice would you give there?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's really important you can practice without a Sangha around you. And, you know, it's very important to practice. I think we shouldn't have a sort of dogma, if there's no Sangha, you can't practice. There is also the wonders now of the internet and Zoom and all that sort of thing. So we can connect, you know, with spiritual friends throughout the world who can be supportive and helpful. And there's another saying that Bhante Sangharakshita taught me on a seminar, or taught us on a seminar. It was something he liked because I know he repeated it a number of places. It's a story from Sufism. And it's a story of a great North African Sufi master. And his disciple had to go back to his tribe. He didn't want to go back to his tribe because his tribe weren't Sufis. They weren't on a spiritual path. He didn't want to leave his teacher, didn't want to leave his fellow disciples in the teacher's community. And the teacher just wouldn't have it. He just cut across when he said, well, I don't want to go. He said, create the person you need. You must create them. You must make them. So this is another perhaps really inspiring way of thinking. You need spiritual friends, so make them. By starting, maybe you start a little meditation class, a little meditation group in your town. You just start gently talking about your interest in Buddhism. You start a little reading group, something like that. And just start creating the people you need. And in that way, the Sangha grows. So that's another way you can approach it.
Actually, okay, so just taking us on a perhaps bit of another tack, quite early in your talk, you talked about Dr. Ambedkar being a bodhisattva, and you refer to him as Bodhisattva Dr. Ambedkar. So maybe you could just say, well, what is a bodhisattva, and in what sense is Dr. Ambedkar a bodhisattva?
So bodhisattva traditionally is someone who is completely committed to the path of liberation, but not just for themselves. They want the liberation of all life. This is the traditional meaning of a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is someone who's taken profound vows. They understand that you can't separate yourself out from other people. That's impossible. So if you're on a path to liberation, that has to involve the liberation of other people. You can't just enjoy yourself, enjoy your own liberation. You feel profoundly connected with all of others. The Bodhisattva path really is drawing our attention to the fact that in the end, the Buddhist path is an endless path. There's no end to it. The liberation goes on and on, because there's always going to be beings who need to be liberated, no matter how sorted out you are. And in India, the disciples, the followers of Dr. Ambedkar, regard him as a bodhisattva because, of course, he is a great liberator. He is a great liberator. He liberated and led, Dalit people out of slavery, out of untouchability, into a completely different life. And not only, economically, not only, politically, not only socially, but he gives them an individual spiritual path, a path of development by the conversion to Buddhism, leading people into the Dharma. And, I've studied Dr. Ambedkar's life. Now, all right, it might not be like, studying the life of Shantideva or, the bodhisattvas of the tradition and so on and so forth. But what I see in looking at that life is somebody who completely dedicates themselves to others, but also sees life as development, as change, as transformation. So I have no problem with thinking of him as a bodhisattva, a very, very practical bodhisattva. And, when I talk to my Indian Buddhist friends, the way they talk about Baba Sahib, the way they talk about him is just so moving. They really feel, well, they say, I feel liberated from hell. Well, if somebody's done that for you, what are they? They must be a bodhisattva.
Thank you. Thank you. Someone else is asking, and it probably relates to the question before last about, well, what about it's not just that you can't find people around you to practice with, but actually the people around you are sort of anti-practice. They're not interested in practicing, not interested in Buddhism. What do you do then?
Well, you're going to have to be a bodhisattva. That's, and I know it can be very painful. And I have friends in the Sangha where their nearest and dearest are actually hostile, to their practice. And it's really hard. I think it's important to acknowledge that. Sometimes, I've had, well, in this case, it's men on retreat, and, they were given a hard time before they came on a retreat, and they know that they're going back to getting a hard time as well. And I've heard the same story with women on women's retreats, having that same sort of journey. And it is really difficult. Or, you're living in a country or a city where there's a lot of tension, maybe a lot of violence, maybe a lot of uncertainty. It's really difficult to practice. So, but I think what you have to think in terms of, you have to think that actually you're being really heroic. You're a great person, actually, if you can practice like that. Even if you're keeping up a bit of practice, even a bit of meditation, and behaving according to your values, according to the values of the precepts. I really admire people who practice in that context. I mean, I've got it easy living in this retreat center. It's so easy here. So it's very, very important for me to hear people how they hear from people, how they practice, where they feel so alone. But if you can do that, you really develop some real Dharma character. The great Hakuin, great Zen, Rinzai Zen master, he has a wonderful saying: the lotus that is born in the fire is far superior to the lotus that is born in the water. And he says that the lotus that's born in the fire, that's the person practicing the Dharma in really difficult conditions. Whereas the lotus that's born in the water, well, in a way, that's very, very easy. So here at Padmavajra, we live in the realm of the lotus. Well, we're kind of easy lotuses, whereas those of you out there in difficult situations, you're the really, really indestructible lotuses, the lotuses growing in the fire. So thank you for practicing in that way, because we need you out there practicing in that way. So remind yourself that what you're doing is really heroic in practicing the Dharma to the extent that you can in very difficult circumstances.
Thank you, Padmavajra. That's a very wonderful, rousing response to that question. Right at the beginning of your talk, when you talked about sila and Buddhist morality being a morality of intention, that got quite a lot of interest. And people were saying, yes, good intentions aren't enough. There has to be action. But I wonder if you could say a little bit more about what do we mean when we say Buddhism as an ethics of intention, or Buddhist ethics as an ethics of intention?
Well, maybe we could take an example. Let's take the example of generosity. So somebody could give someone something, but there's no real spirit of generosity. It's a formal thing. It might even be a generosity because they want something back. It might be even a bit manipulative. So that would be unskillful. Outwardly, it looks like a selfless act, but actually inwardly, it's manipulative. Whereas what you're really looking for is both the generous action, which is coming from an intention which is completely open-handed and open-ended. You see what I mean? I think this is the way you can the way you can look at it. Just look at your behaviors, perhaps particularly in terms of habitual behaviors, habitually good behaviors even. What are they springing from? What are they coming from? You can get people, their speech sounds very, very loving, but actually you start to realize you're being sort of flattered, maneuvered. It's not really loving. And you might have somebody who's a bit awkward in their speech, but there's love. That's there. So that's the kind of thing I'm getting at. It's making the inward and the outward, consonant, if you like, with one another. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. And what about towards ourselves? Like someone's asking, like, well, it's easy to get in almost a bit of a fight with ourselves when we feel like that we haven't got much faith, or we've got a sort of lack of self-belief in ourselves. What would you recommend there?
Lack of belief in ourselves.
Yeah.
Well, it is a thing, isn't it? That I've noticed it quite a lot. This sort of lack of confidence and lack of sort of self-belief. Interestingly enough, in Buddhist tradition, I mean, particularly Shantideva in the Bodhicharyavatara, he's quite blunt about that. He says that sort of lack of self-belief, even a sort of self-loathing, is a lack of virya, a lack of effort, a lack of energy in the pursuit of the good, which some people might find a bit shocking. But you can sort of see what he means. I mean, I sort of find it myself sometimes that I have this thing where, not so much these days, but it used to be very, very strong, where I love the Dharma's great, but I can't do it. I can't do it. I'm that unique person that can't do the Dharma. And I'd often sort of talk like that with friends of mine. And when one particular friend, Arloka, I'd have this particular narrative going on about how wonderful the Dharma is, but I can't do it. I'm not confident. And he'd always come back very strongly. Oh, so you're the exception to the Buddha's teaching. You're the uniquely flawed one. And of course, that is a kind of conceit. There is a kind of weird pride in that, the pride of I can't do it. And it's interesting that we tend to think of conceit as a sort of sense of superiority. But there's another kind of conceit, which is the sense of I can't do it. And I think if you're feeling in that, what you've got to remind yourself of, you've got to come back, I think, to something really basic, really basic. Don't get into too much psychological analysis. Why do I have this? What happened, when I was a child and all that sort of thing? That might be useful. No, come back to the preciousness of human existence. Hey, I'm a human being. Well, that's a start. I'm a human being. This human life is amazing, actually, because my senses are alive. They're working. I have a quality of awareness. I actually have a quality of freedom. I can decide what I do with my life. Just start with something really basic. You don't have to pump yourself up. Just start with that basic awareness and just build from that. That's what I would recommend there. Yeah?
Great. That's a fierce, friendly answer, Padmavajra response. That's very good. Good. And I think this is going to be the last question now. In a way, I think it might touch on things you've said before, but Isaac's quite taken with this, quite roused, I think, by the thought of us being these lotuses in the fire, by having the courage to practice in the midst of resistance. How do we keep in touch with that? How do we step into that courage more and more?
How do we do that?
Yeah.
I mean, the only answer is, in the end, to really be regular in your Dharma practice. Every day I do the Metta Bhavana. Every day I meditate on the Buddha, the meditation on the Buddha that I was given at ordination. I see those things as absolutely fundamental to what I do wherever I've been. Here I've got these sort of wonderful conditions. Although at the moment it's a little, I know this isn't a sob story, but it's a little bit of a struggle for me at the moment because I'm in quite a bit of pain because of I did some damage to my shoulder, so my sleep isn't very good. But I still turn to my practices. I still turn to those. I won't let go of those. So even though it's difficult, even though I'm in very, very good conditions, I must turn in the direction of loving kindness and the inspiration that comes from the Buddha. When I lived in India, in sometimes very, very difficult situations, when I lived in Mumbai in the 1980s, in some ways very inspiring conditions, particularly because of Buddhist people there who just really loved the Dharma and wanted to hear the Dharma. But Mumbai is a tough city. It was a tough city in the 1980s. It was sometimes in quite tricky situations, quite demanding situations. I always felt that, listen, you've just got to turn in the direction of the Dharma. I know it sounds a platitude. There's no special technique here, but you have to turn in that direction. It's the only thing that you can do. And yes, spiritual friends are so, so important, I think. That encouragement. I remember one time here at Padmavajra many years ago, it was when Sangharashta had his secretaries living here. He was mostly in London at the time, but he used to phone up in the evening to talk to one of his secretaries, but they wanted to go out that evening to the pictures or something, to the cinema. So they asked me to man the phone. So Bhante Sangharashta called up, and he said, "Oh, Padmavajra, it's very nice to hear your voice." And I said, "Well, yes, they've gone to the cinema." And he said, "Oh, good, but it's good to talk to you, and it's been a long time. How are you?" And I said, "Bhante, I'm finding things really difficult. I'm finding things difficult because Subhuti's left us, the ordination team, and I'm feeling that I'm not making any real progress in my Dharma life, and everything's very difficult." And he said, he just cut across it, "Well, I miss Subhuti. I miss him." And I said, "But I haven't made any progress, Bhante. It's so slow. There's hardly anything." He said, "No, it's measurable. Your progress is measurable." I said, "It's infinitesimal." He said, "Measurable, measurable." And it was quite strong. He wasn't having it. There was progress. Didn't matter how little it was, but there was progress. So that was a real gift from a spiritual friend. So two things. Keep turning to the Dharma as much as you can, particularly Metta Bhavana, particularly I find devotional practice, the ideas of the Dharma, keep reflecting on the Buddha words, and turn to spiritual friends and let them in, let them rouse you, let them tell you how to do it.
Thank you, Padmavajra. Well, that's going to be all we've got time for by way of questions, but I feel like you have really roused us this afternoon. You've certainly roused me. And I was just sitting here, just sort of enjoying your presence. And I was thinking about an image you used in your talk about being set around and filled with. And I was thinking, oh, Padmavajra is someone who's set around with the practice of the Dharma, the path of regular steps, like, you know, like the way like a sapphire might be set around with diamonds. And I was thinking on Padmavajra's filled with the Dharma and, well, overflowing actually. And you've really let that overflow to us on this Dharma Day. So thank you very, very much. And if you were here with us in this room, we'd be showering you with bouquets and applause and everything. But thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you, Padmavajra.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this Dharma Day. I just want to now tell you about what's coming up next. And first of all, I want to basically make an appeal to you. So Padmavajra has really given us the vision of the Dharma this afternoon. And that's what this whole London Buddhist Centre is about. Just bring more and more to life that vision of the Dharma, which is a transcendental vision. And we're doing that whether our doors are open or closed or a teeny little bit open, which they're going to be later on this evening. And I just really want to invite you to help us in that project. So I'm sitting here with Ipalit. I forgot to introduce him, actually. I should have earlier. Ipalit's been sitting here in the shrine room doing the tech with us. Actually, he's doing that so much these days. And but Ipalit also is our treasurer here at the Buddhist Centre. And he recently told us we're going to be making quite a bit of a loss because we've had to close our doors and we're going to have to start eating in to our reserves to the tune of £10,000 every single month. And as Jnana Vacha said in his talk the other night, let's not make a tiny little thing like a matter of £10,000 between friends, as it were, stop us in being able to just keep this vision of the Dharma alive and inviting more and more people from more and more places to partake of this vision, this transcendental vision. So we're asking everyone if you could consider giving to that vision by giving £50 if you can. If you can give more, of course, that's wonderful, because every single bit of that money will be go towards keeping this vision of the Dharma alive. And if that's if you can, if that's too much, then whatever you can give is wonderful. And thank you so much to those of you who've given, well, especially this week on the Steps to Enlightenment course, loads of you have been giving £50 and more and less as well. And thank you to all of you who've been giving to us since lockdown. It really, really just, well, it just means we can keep doing what we're doing. And then finally to say at 7:30 this evening, we're all tremendously excited because we're going to have 10 Mitra ceremonies. And this is sort of magical. It's always magical having Mitra ceremonies, but we're actually going to be having those Mitra ceremonies actually here at the London Buddhist Centre. So the announcement from the government came just in time that we're actually allowed to have those Mitra ceremonies here. So we had a plan B just in case we weren't, but actually we can go with plan A. And 10 people are actually probably feeling a mixture of excited and nervous right now because they are going to be coming into the centre. They'll be the first people coming in apart from us who live here and work here. And they're going to be having their Mitra ceremonies, which is a very, very, very significant step in anyone's life, where they're going to be really ritually saying with us all as witnesses, and I'm hoping you're all going to join us, that they're Buddhists and they're practicing Sila Samadhi Prajna, as Padmavajra has just been talking about, and doing that within this Triratna community. So it really, really would like to welcome every one of you to join us on YouTube for those ceremonies. Especially good if you're wondering what it means to become a Mitra. If you're wondering, well, how do I take the next step? Then it's the best way to find out is by seeing other people do that. So do join us at 7:30. It'll be wonderful to see you there. So we'll now, I'll now say goodbye to you for an hour or two and see you later. Bye-bye.